Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for this teaching. My name is David, I'm the pastor of Foundation Church Belfast, and together over these next few moments I want to think with you about Easter. You know, Easter is one of the most important celebrations in the Christian calendar, and so I think it's important for us to spend some time just thinking briefly by getting to grips with what is Easter, what is the Christian message. So together we're going to read for a few verses from the Bible. We're going to look then at a little more detail at the actual history, the story of Easter. And then when we've done that, in part 2, we're going to look at the meaning of Easter. What, if any, meaning does it have for us? It's theology, if you like. And thirdly and finally, in part 3, we're going to look at our response to Easter, or some of our responses to Easter. So first of all, the history of Easter, the theology of Easter, and thirdly, the need for Easter. Before we do that, I want to read to you from Mark's Gospel account in the New Testament, Mark 16. One of the earliest writings to talk about the life of Jesus says this: When Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Salome, brought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on, the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb, and they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. It's important that before we think of the meaning or how we respond to Easter, we understand that it was a historic event. It's something that really happened, that a man called Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, that they placed him in a tomb, and according to what we've just read, that tomb was empty on the third day, on the Sunday morning. And he appeared subsequently to many, many people, including his disciples. And we've just read from Mark's Gospel account. It's the earliest of all the 4 Gospels in the New Testament, written from 20 to 30 years after the events it describes. So within living memory for a lot of people, very easy for Mark to collate eyewitness information, first-hand information from those who are actually there. And so therefore, what we've just read together is the earliest resurrection account in all 4 of the Gospels. Obviously, if this was written 200 or 300 years later after the facts that it reports, it would be a bit of a dubious historical document. But this is incredibly early and increases our confidence that what we're reading here, it actually happened. So the story up until this moment has been that Jesus of Nazareth, as we said, died on a cross, that he was taken down from that cross and placed in this temporary tomb belonging to a man called Joseph of Arimathea. So to use our dating, Jesus died on the Friday. On the Saturday, which was the Jewish Sabbath, the day of rest, he was in the tomb. Nothing happened because the Jews by law were prohibited from work. They were prohibited from touching a dead body, etc. And so it tells us in the section we've just read that at the crack of dawn on the first day of the week, on the Sunday, 2 women called Mary and one woman called Salome, 3 of them, went off to anoint the body with spices. That was traditional part of the preparation process for burial. And it's clear from what we've just read together that their actions and their discussion, they went expecting to find a dead body. They came prepped with the spices and all the bits and pieces required to prepare the body for formal burial. And in fact, in verse 3, it seems that they were chatting on the way, asking one another who was going to remove the stone. They knew that the stone had been placed over the place where Jesus was. They were worried about getting access to the body so they might carry out their duties. And so there they were, worried about that, thinking, well, the 3 of us can't move it. We'll need some help or some, people with muscle or whatever it is to get this thing moved. Anyway, it says there that instead of seeing the stone there, they got there and found it had been rolled away And instead, when they went inside, this individual, this character that Mark describes as a young man, in verse 5, was sat there instead. Now, that young man was not Jesus. Mark doesn't comment who that young man was. In Matthew's gospel account and Luke's gospel account, they identify him as an angel. But anyway, a young man was there, had a youthful appearance, sort of has a ring of authenticity about it, I think. An eyewitness account. Who would have known what he looked like had it not been someone who had seen him? Anyway, sat again on the right side of where the body was. Again, seems like a pointless detail, unless it was, true eyewitness testimony. But anyway, this young man was there. It says that these three women were alarmed, as you would probably be, going expecting to find a dead body and finding that not only was the stone rolled away, but the body was gone. They were alarmed. And the young man spoke to them and he said, look, don't be alarmed, chill out. It's okay, relax, peace be with you. You've come here, haven't you, seeking Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified. But let me tell you, he has risen. Love that. He has risen. He's not here. See, come, look, and look at the place where he was laid. Come and check. Come and have a good look around. He's definitely not here. One thing we didn't read together at the end of the passage before was that these three women, two of them anyway, the two Marys, were there at the time when Jesus was buried. So they knew exactly where he was placed. They saw the most likely the stone being rolled. They knew exactly the situation. And when they got back on the Sunday, as we're reading, it was very, very different to how they remember from the Friday nights. He's not there. The young man continues. Look, Jesus will meet his disciples in Galilee. He told them that already. This is a reminder. Go back and tell the disciples, Peter, James and John and all these other guys, Jesus will meet them in Galilee at the place where he talked about, as he planned. And then the account ends with their reaction, the three women in verse 8. It says they fled, they panicked, they freaked out and they dashed away. Probably a million things going through their minds at this moment, struggling to take all this in, the message from this angelic figure, the consequences of the empty grave. What should they believe? Was this just a hallucination? Was this even true? They lost the plot and they ran. It says they didn't tell anyone. They were afraid to say anything to anyone. Now we know from other gospel accounts that they indeed eventually did say to others and shared the news. Which kick-started a whole chain of events. But right now, we're left with them in verse 8, fleeing away, freaking out. This account that we've just read is made even more remarkable when we understand something of the background to this text. In the ancient Near East, at the time when this was written, under Jewish law, it was not permissible for a woman to give testimony in court. Different in our day, of course. But women were not considered to be reliable witnesses. And so just think for a moment, if someone was going to be fabricating a story about a resurrected Savior, then women would not have been the first ones that would be written into the story to discover the resurrection. Instead, if you or I were writing a legend or a fabricated tale, you may have put yourself as the one who discovered Jesus, or Peter, or the great apostle, or victoriously walking into the empty tomb, or someone like that. But it wasn't. The only plausible explanation for women to be the first ones to discover the resurrection was that it is a true account. They really did enter the tomb. They really did find that it was empty before anyone else did. It's sometimes said about other religions, other world religions, take for example Buddhism, that it doesn't really matter whether Buddha was a historic person or not, whether he actually did live or existed or not. The thing that holds such religions together is the teaching, the moral philosophy, the pattern of how to live your life. That's what's important. But nothing could be further from the truth when it comes to Christianity. In fact, Christianity rises and falls on the historicity of the empty grave. In fact, the Apostle Paul writes elsewhere, if in Christ we have hope only in this life, he says, we of all people, we Christians of all people are to be most pitied. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, then let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. What's he saying? He's saying that unless Jesus really rose from the grave, then Christianity simply falls apart. It doesn't matter how good it makes your life in the here and now, what it does for your marriage or your sense of purpose or anything like that. Unless the grave is empty, we have nothing. Paul said that we are above all people are to be most pitied if Jesus didn't rise from the grave. We should just hang out and party and enjoy our short time on earth because that's all we have. But if it is true, if the grave was empty, if Jesus did rise from the dead, as the gospel accounts that we've been reading plainly suggest, then we must take notice. We must think about it. So I wonder, have you ever read the gospel accounts? Have you ever taken time to consider them on their own terms? And if you have, do you have reasons to reject them? To not take them as true? Now it's obvious, isn't it, that people ordinarily, in our own experience, do not rise from the grave. It is a weird phenomenon. It is a one-off, we could say. Yes, it is weird. Yes, it is unusual. But the question is, not is it weird, but the question is, did it happen? Was the grave empty? Are these accounts to be taken at face value? Because Christianity rises and falls on the truth of the empty grave.